Chances are you have one of these in your home right now, a simple cooking gas tank. But what if I told you that this very ordinary household item was at the center of a massive legal war, a war that went all the way to the Supreme Court? This is the incredible story of how two of the biggest brands in the business went head-to-head with a small, independent refiller, all because of what was being put inside their tanks.
Seems like a pretty straightforward question, right? Your tank is empty, so you go get it refilled. What's the big deal? Well, as we're about to find out, the answer is anything but simple. In fact, it rips open this fierce battle over what a brand name really protects. And it all kicks off with two corporate giants and one much smaller competitor.
So how in the world did this humble gas tank become a legal battleground? Well, to understand that, we first have to meet the players in this fight. Okay, so on one side, you've got the Goliaths, Petron and Pilipinas Shell. We're talking about the owners of those super iconic GASUL and SHELLANE brands. And here's the crucial part. They don't just own the names, they own the actual physical steel tanks themselves. Then on the other side, you've got David, a company called Republic Gas Corporation, or REGASCO. They're a smaller, independent company that's licensed to sell LPG, liquefied petroleum gas.
The whole thing started when whispers began circulating among the dealer associations for Petron and Shell. They were hearing about their tanks being refilled without their permission, and pretty soon, all signs were pointing to one main suspect: REGASCO. Now, the allegation was simple, but it was also explosive. They claimed REGASCO was taking empty GASUL and SHELLANE tanks, filling them up with their own LPG, and then selling them to unsuspecting customers. Now, to prove this, investigators didn't just, send a strongly worded letter. Oh no, they launched a full-blown undercover sting operation. I'm talking something straight out of a movie. And this, right here, is where the story gets really, really interesting. The National Bureau of Investigation, or NBI, built their case piece by piece. First, they set up surveillance, just watching the REGASCO plant. Then, an agent named DeGimo went undercover with an informant. Now, to avoid looking suspicious, they did something really clever called a write-on. They took their 4 empty branded tanks and just piggybacked them onto a massive order from a regular customer. They literally stood there and watched REGASCO employees fill their branded tanks right in front of them. And the cherry on top? They got a cash invoice as solid proof. And this wasn't just hearsay. In his official, sworn statement, Agent DeJamil put it as plainly as possible. He said, "We witnessed the actual refilling. They saw it with their own 2 eyes." This direct evidence became the absolute cornerstone of their entire case. So, armed with this slam-dunk evidence, the NBI got search warrants. They raided the REGASCO plant, and wouldn't you know it, they found exactly what they were looking for: tons of both empty and illegally refilled SHELLANE and GASUL tanks. It looked like a total open and shut case. But here's the thing. Just because you have the evidence doesn't mean you've won the war. And this is where the story takes its first big, dramatic turn. Once the case entered the justice system, what followed was a complete legal roller coaster, just bouncing back and forth between total dismissal and a dramatic reversal. Believe it or not, after all that work, the sting operation, the raid, everything, the city prosecutor looked at all the evidence and recommended that the entire case be dismissed, just thrown out. And here was the reasoning. REGASCO's business is refilling gas tanks. The NBI agents brought them empty tanks, and REGASCO, well, they filled them. The prosecutor basically argued that a crime wasn't really committed here. They were just doing their job, not trying to pull a fast one on anybody. As you can imagine, Petron and Shell were not about to accept that. They pushed the case up to the Court of Appeals, and that court had a totally different take. They sharply disagreed with the prosecutor, completely reversed the dismissal, and brought the case roaring back to life. So now you've got this complete legal deadlock. On one hand, a court says, they're just refilling a container. On the other, a court says, this is a serious crime. There was only one place left to settle this thing: the Supreme Court. The fate of the entire case was hanging in the balance. And so we finally get to the final word. The Supreme Court had to cut through all the noise and decide once and for all, was what REGASCO did actually a crime? The answer, it turns out, really came down to 2 key legal concepts. Okay, first up, trademark infringement. The court said that by refilling those branded tanks, REGASCO was basically hijacking the GASUL and SHELLANE trademarks, and that creates a huge problem: confusion. Think about it. When a customer buys a refilled GASUL tank, they're going to assume it's a genuine Petron product, filled to Petron's safety standards by a dealer Petron trusts, but REGASCO wasn't any of those things. Second,
the court looked at something called unfair competition. Now, that's just the legal term for passing off your product as someone else's. By using those very distinct, branded tanks, REGASCO was basically putting its own LPG in a disguise. It gave it the general appearance of a real Petron or Shell product. It was a classic bait and switch designed to trick the public.
So the court decided that the company was definitely in the wrong, but that leads us to one last really critical question. What about the people who are actually running the company?
Can a president or a director just throw up their hands and say, "Hey, the corporation did it, not me"? This is one of the most fundamental questions in all of business law.
And on this point, the court was crystal clear. It's true that a corporation is its own legal entity, but that corporate shield is not bulletproof. The court said that when officers of a company knowingly make the company commit a crime, they can be held personally and criminally responsible. The court used this really powerful phrase, calling them the actual present and efficient actors behind the crime. Basically, you can't just hide behind a company logo when you're the one pulling the strings.
And with that, the final gavel came down. The Supreme Court backed up the Court of Appeals. They ruled that there was more than enough evidence, what's legally called probable cause, to formally charge not just the company, REGASCO, but its directors and officers personally for both trademark infringement and unfair competition.
So there you have it. The simple act of refilling a gas tank ended up defining the very boundaries of what a brand is and what a company is responsible for. And it leaves us with a pretty powerful question, doesn't it? The next time you pick up a product with a famous brand on it, ask yourself, what are you really buying? Is it just the stuff inside the container? Or is it the trust, the quality, and the safety that the name on the outside is supposed to guarantee?